לעזוב הכל, להתגבר, לשוב הביתה.
Every year, the Stanley Z. Penn Memorial Lecture is one of the highlights of our year. But this, our centennial year, makes it take on even greater significance. You see, Stanley's family has been connected to Beth Tefillah for most all of its 100 years, up to this very day. Stanley's parents were members of Beth Tefillah. He and his beautiful wife, Helene, added so much to Beth Tefillah week after week when they would walk into the synagogue and everyone seemed to know them and respect them. And we all continued to think the world of Helene. Stanley was taken from us all too soon, but he had the satisfaction of knowing that his family legacy would continue here at Beth Tefillah, starting with Ruthie and David and continuing not only with their children, but with their children's children. Stanley's great-grandchildren are here at Beth Tefillah. Stanley's name lives on. But not just here. When Stanley passed away, Helene chose to perpetuate his memory here, yes, but also at the Diaspora Museum in Tel Aviv, just continuing a special link between Beth Tefillah and Israel. Rabbi Rosenblatt of blessed memory was the first to take a synagogue group to Israel. Beth Tefillah was the first in Baltimore to have a high holiday Israel bond appeal. Next month, we'll be saluting the many graduates of Beth Tefillah who have chosen to serve in the Israel Defense Forces. But I tell you that a case can be made that our greatest contribution to Israel was in giving them Daniel Gordis, a graduate of our day school. He has gone on to be the senior vice president of the Shalem College in Jerusalem, but even more so, the Forward newspaper has referred to Daniel Gordis as, I quote, one of the most influential Israel analysts around. And I'm going to give you an example of just how influential he is. Most all of my thinking and writings and sermons relating to Israel and American Jewry are a result of what I have read from Daniel Gordis. I've read everything he writes, have been profoundly influenced by his thinking. Let me just give you one example. 2 years ago, Daniel wrote this book, We Stand Divided, the Rift Between American Jews and Israel. Now, I read it from cover to cover. That's unique because sometimes I only read the cover. But I did what I do whenever I read a book and find a thought of interest and worth remembering, I put a flag on the page. Some books have no flags. Some have 3 or 4. This book had so many flags in it that I asked my assistant, Arlene, to take out the flags and instead just type a list of the page numbers and the subjects that I wanted to remember. So it starts with page 26, Ben Gurion and the Ultra-Orthodox, and it concludes on page 244, Leonard Cohen wrote, there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. In between, there are 35 other listings. Page 33, Mizrachim. Page 37, Israel never intended to be another United States. Page 40, Eichmann. Page 49, Reform in Israel. Page 54, Brandeis. On and on and on and on. 35 pages that taught me something worth remembering. That's an all-time record. and I continue to learn from him up to today. So I thank you, Helene, for giving me the opportunity to do what I've wanted to do for a long time now. Spend an hour schmoozing with Daniel Gordis. Daniel, welcome to Beth Tefillah.
Rabbi Wahlberg, thank you very much for the gracious, very gracious invitation or introduction. It's really an honor to be at Beth Tefillah. I must say, I wish I was at Beth Tefillah. And as you know, our plan had been for next month for me to actually physically come to Baltimore. In fact, we were going to bring my brothers together and go around Baltimore and see the old houses and the old schools, because we really are all spread out. And I certainly, living in Jerusalem, don't get to Baltimore very much anymore. Unfortunately, a family medical issue, which thank God is slowly resolving, but is not quite resolved yet, precludes our coming to the States this coming month. So I am really very grateful to you and your committee and your colleagues and the entire congregation for making it possible for us to do this event by Zoom, even if we couldn't do it in person. So I want to say something just quickly about Baltimore, which I mentioned to you when we spoke briefly, and about Beth Tefillah. As you mentioned, I'm a graduate of the Beth Tefillah Day School. I remember very clearly in fourth grade, Mrs. Rosen told us we were going to learn how to write essays, and she told us what an essay was. And I remember thinking to myself, I'll just never be able to do this. This is just not, I mean, that's not happening. But so I guess, she was the first person that actually taught me how to write an essay, so I owe her some credit. And I remember very clearly, I think it was in 1966, 67, I think 66, when the big shul was being built and those big struts were going up. I must have been in second grade or something. And I was always fascinated by construction and watching these enormous curved beams that were holding up the whole shul going up. I was much more interested in that, I have to say, than whatever was going on in the classroom inside. It was second grade. It probably didn't matter all that much, but I really feel very, very close to Beth Tefillah. And so therefore, to be part of its celebration of its centennial as a graduate of the day school really means a tremendous amount to me. And I'm profoundly grateful to you for the invitation. The other thing that I'll say is that I left Baltimore in 1977. I graduated Pikesville in 77, and you arrived in 1978. And I had not been at Columbia for more than a couple of months or maybe a year. And people started to mail me things. Those were the old days when people would actually put pieces of paper in envelopes and put a stamp on it and put it in the mailbox. And people would send me your sermons. And, did you see this by Rabbi Wahlberg? Did you just read that by Rabbi Wahlberg? And they were, of course, extraordinary. And then when my wife and I went to the Soviet Union, I guess it was in 1982, and we saw these little pieces of paper that they had with a Mishnah or whatever, and they would pass them around because there were no other ways of making copies. I thought, oh, they treat the Mishnah like in Baltimore, they treat the sermons of Rabbi Wahlberg. In other words, you have this printed copy and everybody holds on to it and passes around. Did you read this? Did you learn this? And obviously in more recent years, it's become emails that were forwarded and then links that were forwarded. But to this very day, it's been, 43 years or something, I guess, like that. And an extraordinary rabbinate, an extraordinary lifetime of profound accomplishment. And here I am in Jerusalem, and really, it's not at all uncommon for someone to send me a link. You got to listen to this. You got to read this. It's really been extraordinary. And so to have the opportunity for us to spend a little bit of time schmoozing is really, for me, a very great honor. And once again, I want to thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
We're going to mostly be in dialogue because I think schmoozing is much more fun for us than listening to some talking head, and hopefully more interesting for those people who have kindly joined us this evening as part of the Penn lecture to talk. But I'll just, you asked me to say a couple of things as an introduction. So I will do two things. I want to say one thing about the basic claim of We Stand Divided, the book that you just held up, which is the book that I wrote about American Jews in Israel. And then I want to say something about what I think is developed since that book came out. And that if I was going to write the book now or add a chapter or two now, what I think needs to be added since the book came out a couple of years ago, but obviously you write it a year or two before that. So it's been a little bit of time. The argument that I made in We Stand Divided is that this notion that the reason relationship between American Jews and Israel has gotten so profoundly complex, maybe even tormented, is not what everybody says it is. The reason is not the conflict or Israel's treatment of non-Orthodox Jews, non-Orthodox converts, which is not to say that the conflict is not critically important. The conflict is critically important. It's not to say that the occupation is not a profoundly significant moral issue for Israel. almost everybody in Israel recognizes that it's a profoundly significant moral issue. Just doesn't mean that it has a solution, but it's clearly an issue. But the way in which I try to show in the book that these issues cannot be the core or the root cause of the problematic or fraught relationship between American Jews and Israel is that the relationship between Israel and American Jews is fraught long before there's an occupation, long before Israel starts saying anything complicated, controversial about non-Orthodox Jews. The relationship is actually fraught before there's a state of Israel. The relationship you can already see being fraught in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration. Because on the one hand, in the United States, President Woodrow Wilson is walking around saying to people at one naturalization ceremony after another, we want you to be Americans, but you can't be Austrian American. You can't be Italian American. You can't be Polish American. The minute you put that hyphen in the American something, you're not really American. That's not what we want of you. We want you to be American. And many different ethnic groups, including Jews, wanted to embrace that. But at the same time that Woodrow Wilson in 1917 is going around saying that all over the States and in naturalization ceremonies and comments that he's writing, that's when the Balfour Declaration comes out. And the British Empire basically gets behind the idea of a Jewish state, right? His Majesty's government looks with favor upon the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. And European Zionists now say to American Jews, okay, look, we got a green light. You got to help us build this country. And American Jews are in an entirely difficult situation. On the one hand, Wilson has demanded no hyphens. And Jews in Europe, who are their brethren and their sisters and so forth, are saying, you got to help us build this other country. And there's no way to really involve yourself in building that other country without somehow risking the welcome that President Wilson and much of American society have presented to you. And so it's complicated and it's hard for American Jews long before, that's 30 years, 31 years before there's even a Jewish state. Now, there's lots of other things that are going on that I won't go into. They're in the book. And, it really doesn't matter to me whether you read it as long as you buy it for everyone you know. But what I will say is this. There's one example, for example, Saul Bellow, in his very, very famous novel, Humboldt's Gift, writes in the name of Humboldt, who was an Eastern European Jewish immigrant to the United States. And he says that Humboldt believed that history was a nightmare. And he's come to America to get a good night's rest, which is a fabulous line. Because as Americans, America really did give us a good night's rest from history. We, by and large, know what's happening in history, but we've been protected from it. It doesn't unfold. Certainly the military dimension of it rarely unfolds on American soil. The vast majority of the young people who've grown up in Beth Tefillah, the vast majority of my American friends were not in the American Armed Forces, were given a little bit of a good night's sleep, a good night's rest in the messiness of history. Not so in Israel. We have not gotten a good night's rest. We've not gotten a good Shabbos shluf. We have not had, here to be in history is, to live here is to be deeply in history. To live here is to be able to accept that history is going to be very messy. And there are going to be conflicts that we have no choice but to be in. We're not going to always be happy with what staying alive here might require of us. But there's ways, and here, of course, I'm not speaking about Beth Tefillah or its community, which is in a different place, which I'll come back to in a second. But for the typical North American Jew, the messiness of history is too complicated. It's just ugly. It doesn't feel Jewish. And so there have been tensions between American Jews and Israel about ideas about how to conduct the Jewish state from a very, very, very long time. Plus, as I said, the very real issue of the conflict with the Palestinians, what many people call occupation, some people don't like to call occupation, and so forth. If I were to add a chapter or two to the book now, what I would say is that in addition to all of those issues, and I point about how in Israel, really, Judaism is fundamentally a nationalism. There is clearly a religious dimension to it. But if you walk around a street in Jerusalem and you say to somebody, I'm going to give you a phrase, you complete it. You go to the central bus station, you say Jews and, they're going to say Arabs, right? But if you walk around Baltimore, Park Heights or wherever it's going to be, you say Jews and, people are going to say either Gentiles or Christians, Jews and Christians, Jews and Gentiles. In other words, in America, we fill in that phrase with a religion. And in Israel, we fill in that phrase with another national group, because Arab isn't a religion. There's Christian Arabs, there's Muslim Arabs, there's all kinds of, there's Druze Arabs, there's all different kinds of different Arabs. We're here in a country, I'm speaking to you from Jerusalem. We're in a country where Judaism is fundamentally a nationalism. Many Israelis are also involved in the religious dimension of Jewish life, as am I, of course, but many are not. Whereas in America, the default position, the default understanding was that if you're Jewish, it's somehow your religion, and then you might do other things as well. That may be changing, but that's at least how it always was. But in the last couple of years, of course, something else has developed as the really tidal waves of cultural change have begun to sweep across America. And we won't go into the whole question of wokeness and what that has done to Zionism and what's happening on college campuses in America. What I will say is this, though, and Mati Friedman pointed this out in a brilliant article in The Atlantic, probably 6-9 months ago. And then actually I did a podcast with him, which is on my podcast website. You can find, he spoke about it really eloquently. And Mati's point was that Americans in general, and American Jews in particular, tend to look at Israel. And again, I'm not talking about a community like Beth Tefillah, which is a radical exception, but American Jews in general think about Israel through the lenses of America. And if the lens of America in 2021 is overwhelmingly, for many people, a lens of the powerful versus the powerless, a lens of race determining every single issue that there is, which is not to suggest that race is not a critically important issue in America. Of course it is. But to look at Israel only from the point of view of the powerful and the powerless, and from race. And by the way, in that regard, then of course the powerful are always guilty. It's got to be in a kind of a parallel to America. It's going to be the whites who bear responsibility for what happened to the blacks. That's the typical narrative, and there's a lot of truth to that, but there's not all of the truth. But in any event, here you would say, so therefore it's the Jews, the Israelis, who have responsibility for what happened to the Palestinians, what happened to the Arabs. And here, that's entirely not true. We bear some of the responsibility, but they bear a very, very big chunk of the responsibility as well. And therefore, once you begin to look at Israel through the lenses of how Americans increasingly see the world, which, as I said, is about power structures, about race, gender hasn't played into it, obviously, it doesn't really fit. But as long as you look at Israel that way, Israel's always going to be found guilty. The trial is over before the opening arguments get made. And therefore, especially for a younger generation of American Jews who are on college campuses, reading the world through the lens of race and power, it's become increasingly difficult for them to embrace Israel, which seems to be on the wrong side of almost every single issue that they can think of. And here I'll just end by saying that's where Beth Tefillah and Rabbi Wahlberg have been courageous examples of swimming against the stream. In other words, Rabbi Wahlberg is one of those people who does not believe that to be a Zionist, you have to give a rubber stamp to every single thing that Israel does. Israel, like every country, is going to make choices, some of which are going to be right and some of which are going to be wrong, some of which may be justifiable, but you may happen to disagree. Rabbi Wahlberg, to me, has always been one of those thoughtful thought leaders and community leaders about Israel in the United States, who is fundamentally, clearly in love with the Jewish state, who believes that the Jewish state is one of the most important and profound things that has happened to the Jewish people in the last 2,000 years, who believes that a powerful community like Beth Tefillah in Baltimore needs to be in constant relationship with the Jewish state. And he mentioned Rabbi Rosenblatt of blessed memory, who was among the first to take a group of Jews to Israel and so forth. But what Rabbi Wahlberg has really, I think, modeled is a thoughtful, sophisticated, embracing, loving, intellectually nuanced engagement with the state of Israel. That takes courage. I mean, we all know that there are rabbis of all denominations who simply will not talk about Israel from the pulpit. It's just too dangerous. You're going to get hit from the people on the left. You're going to get hit from people on the right. You're going to get hit by this and that. And people say, I'm just not going to talk about it. And we know that in reality, in many shuls and rabbis of all denominations, Israel's just off the charts because it's not one of the issues that people are willing to talk about. And among the many issues to which Rabbi Wahlberg has devoted a really extraordinary rabbinate, an ongoing engagement with Israel has been a very central one. And I have followed that with tremendous interest, first from those little Xeroxes that were mailed out in 78 and 79 and so forth, and now with links and all of that. So from sitting from afar and watching the community that I grew up in, a community that I still feel very much as home, watching it thrive under Rabbi Wolberg's leadership has been truly a source of tremendous nachat and admiration. And in addition to that, it's also, I think, an opportunity to witness great courage for what you have modeled when it comes to American Jews and their relationship with Israel. And so on behalf of all of us who live in Israel, I want to thank you for what you've modeled. Hope that other people will follow in those footsteps. And for you, to wish you mazel tov and tremendous success, health, and continued satisfaction on this next and beginning chapter of an extraordinary career.
Wow, wow, wow. Am I glad I tuned in? Wow. I hope we're making a recording of this. I want to send it to my brothers and say, you see what your little brother turned out to be? Not bad. I don't see myself obviously the same way, but I do see myself, and here is where I really connect with you. You spoke of how we see things through a certain prism, whether it be religion or nationality, or whether it be race and so forth. We also, especially now, tend to see things from a political perspective, the right and the left. If a person's on the right, you almost know exactly where they stand, not only on Republican and Democrat and Trump and Biden, but perhaps on climate change and taxes and vaccines and everything else. And it's also that tendency in Israel. And that's why I have found you to be so attractive, and I've learned so much from you. I don't have to read Caroline Glick every week. I know exactly what she's going to say. I don't have to read Gideon, what's his name in Haaretz?
Gideon Levy.
Gideon Levy every week. I know exactly what he's going to have to say. I need to hear from you and others because I don't know exactly what you're going to say. And I know it's going to be an honest, unbiased perspective. That's missing today in Israel and in the United States. And I think all of us are paying a real price for that. Having said that, we're also living a strange time. You wrote a blog as recently as today entitled "When Unprecedented Times Are Not at All Unprecedented." Tell us what you meant.
Well, we have this sense, everybody talks about what's going on, you'd say in America, right? I mean, attacks on democracy and the hyper-politicalization and contesting elections and so on and so forth. And a lot of people who are much more expert in American history than I have been pointing out that for every single one of these things, there are precedents. In other words, there's a precedent for contested elections in America. There's precedent, unfortunately, even for attacks on the Capitol. There are precedents for issues becoming hyper-politicized when they're really not political issues like vaccines and masks and so on and so forth. And you point out that some of the hyper-politicization that we have in Israel, but not in the same way as you well know. I mean, for example, we have some non-vaxxers here to be sure, but vaccines have not become a political issue here. If somebody's not vaxxed, that doesn't mean that they're left or they're right. It means that they're afraid of the vaccine or they've already had COVID and they don't think they need it or whatever. It's not become a religious, political kind of an issue. Look at our coalition, right? I mean, our coalition has got a kippah wearing Naftali Bennett and Arabs in the coalition and Merav Michaeli from Labor in the coalition. In other words, I think that it would be very hard to imagine, obviously America doesn't have a coalition system, but it would be very hard to imagine a coalition like the one that we have emerging out of a political climate like America. But now coming back to the precedented and unprecedented, I think that everybody also says that these times about, American Jews are really unprecedented. American Jews being on the defensive, and many people who are listening to us tonight may well have followed the little kerfuffle with Sunrise, DC, not letting through, they're not wanting to participate in a rally this past weekend because of the National Council of Jewish Women being part of it, and the Reform Religious Action Center. These are not Zionist organizations. They're organizations that care about Israel, but Zionism is not their call to, there's not their creed de coeur. It's not their purpose for being. And then I also wanted everybody to understand that is not unprecedented. In other words, the round of Israel hatred that we're seeing in America masquerading, well, I would put it differently. The anti-Semitism that we're seeing in America that is masquerading as critique of Israel is not really about Israel. It is just simply good old-fashioned anti-Semitism. And we've seen this before. 1975, when the UN passed the Zionism is racism resolution. I mean, that was really, at that point, probably more about Israel than it was about American Jews. But today, when progressive groups are saying we're not going to participate in something as long as the Religious Action Center of the Reform movement, I mean, what organization are you going to be able to point to which is as closely aligned with their progressive values among the established American Jewish, set of organizations? You're not going to find anything much more finely attuned, but they won't attend because Israel is part of the Reform Religious Action Center's agenda. It's not about Israel. It's about anti-Semitism. And we've seen this in Europe, where there were all kinds of explanations about why the Jews were this and the Jews were that. We've seen it in America before. We've had Father Kachlin. We've had Joe McCarthy going after Jews. Not entirely, obviously, it was communist in general, but it went after many Jews with a vengeance. And it's a very worrisome situation, as I'm sure everybody is aware in Israel. And the next blog that I'm going to be writing, they come out on Mondays, and the one that I'm going to write for this coming Monday is to be picking up a little bit on what's happening on the American left, because there are some people on the left. Peter Beinart was tweeting it this week saying, oh, I talked to all my young Jewish college students, and they say they don't feel any anti-Semitism on campus. They feel rejected by the AIPAC crowd. But that's, of course, ludicrous. And what you see from serious research that's being done, and I'll be pointing to it in a couple of days on the blog, serious research is pointing to a tremendous resurgence of anti-Semitism against mostly Jews on the left, but not only coming from the left. That's the great irony. But I was trying to point out nothing new about this. We've been here before. We saw it in Europe. We've seen it in America. And I'll just end by saying, the great irony about McCarthy, who I mentioned, he wasn't really only going after Jews, obviously, but there were a tremendous number of Jews on that list of alleged communists that he was pursuing. He was pursuing the Jews for being communists. And at the very same time, Stalin was executing the Jews for being capitalists. In other words, the two great superpowers, one was pursuing the Jews for being left, one was pursuing the Jews for not being left enough. And that's the Jewish story. At a certain point, people will find in their own founding ideology a way of making the Jews the opposite of whatever it is that they believe in. And that's because we're not easily categorizable in one thing. At our very best, we're not right-wing or left-wing or exclusively religious or exclusively secular or exclusively spiritual versus exclusively intellectual. At our very best, we dip our ladles into all of those different bowls because we think there's value and wisdom to be had to degrees in all of those worldviews. So everybody can find something that they don't like about the Jews when they want to. And it keeps coming. It comes in waves. In our lifetimes, we really haven't seen it very, very vividly in the United States. We're seeing it now. It's very sad. It's very worrisome. Hope and pray that it will pass. But it's going to take a tremendous amount of effort to get young American Jews to stick with us until it does pass, because it's not going to be very quick.
Couple of questions. We speak about the threat that is definitely coming from the left. What about the threat from the right? Today is the 3rd anniversary of the Tree of Life. Disaster. The closest thing, definitely in America, in the category of unprecedented.
Right, for sure.
Are we caught in this double bind? So many people write about who's a greater threat to us, the left or the right. Is there any difference?
There are differences, as you well know. I mean, first of all, what people love to say is, there's some anti-Semitism on the right, there's some anti-Semitism on the left. And what the left will say is, but it's all words, is on the right that they kill you. Now, there's a certain truth to that. There has not been really egregious anti-Jewish violence in America coming from the left yet. Though if American cities go up in flames like they did a couple of summers ago, who knows? Anything could happen. One can easily imagine synagogues getting attacked the way that stores were attacked and so forth. So there is a difference. I mean, the violence has come from the right, and the more ideologically fervent anti-Semitism has come from the left. But it's, of course, as we all know, all of us on this conversation are fairly schooled in Jewish history. We all know that what starts as one form of anti-Semitism always spreads. What becomes the anti-Semitism of the brown shirts becomes the anti-Semitism of an entire country, becomes the anti-Semitism of half a continent. And it destroys a third of the Jewish people, destroys 90% of European Jewry. And so I don't take any comfort in the idea that, for example, there's no violence against Jews coming from the left, because they can destroy the Jewish world simply by making it untenable for young American Jews to want to be part of the Jewish people. If they create enough hostility on college campuses, young American Jews who want to fit in will simply say, the Jewish thing was quaint. It was nice. My Bubby and my Zadie came for Seders and we sang and it was nice, but I don't really need it anymore. And if it's going to mean not being able to be part of the anti-climate change issues and the race issues and the economic equality issues that I care about, and rights for all sorts of gender and sexuality related issues and all of that, which I really deeply care about, they're going to say, if being Jewish or committed to Israel makes me an outsider in all of that, then I'm going to put the Jewish thing aside. That's just as dangerous for the Jewish people as shooting them, because you can get thousands or hundreds of thousands of American Jews to abandon Judaism that way, in a way that you can't possibly do with violence in America. But having said that, especially on the anniversary of Tree of Life, which is horrifying, and very good friends of ours who live right down the street, she lost a sibling. It's horrible. It touched everybody everywhere, no matter where in the world we live Jewishly. We're a small Jewish family at the end of the day. We have to remember that while, thank God, only a one-day incident, and then Poway was even smaller, thank God for that as well. The ice has been broken. The ice has been broken, and we all know that there are hundreds of millions of illegal weapons in the United States. That's a literal number. There's probably about 300 million illegal weapons, it's estimated, in the United States. You don't need all 300 million of them to be used in nefarious ways in a society which is not heavily protected. I mean, there's guards here and guards there, but anybody that wants to get into Beth Tefillah or into any other shul, it's not France, where there's really gates and metal detectors. That's a different story, or Germany. But in America, anybody who wants to get into a shul is going to get into a shul with a couple of off-duty policemen or security guards, whatever, as well-intentioned and well-trained as they may be. They're not there to protect against automatic weapon fire. So we have to hope and pray that this does not spread, but it could. It could spread on the left. It could spread on the right. And I think that, as you quite rightly mentioned, the anniversary of Tree of Life, and we all remember where we were when we heard about it. It was a Shabbos, obviously, and every single one of us can remember where we were the minute we heard about it for the first time. And it's a very, very, very tragic day for the people involved. And it's a very, very worrisome day for us as people who care about American Jewish life to remember that we have to hope and pray that that was the beginning and the end, but it typically hasn't worked out that way in Jewish history.
Let me get back to something you said before. In speaking about the Sunrise Movement, you said that the bottom line is that this is not anti-Zionism, this is anti-Semitism. Is there a difference? Can one be an anti-Zionist and not be an anti-Semite?
So I don't want everybody to say that every answer that I give is so long-winded, so no. Now, I might add a little bit to that and say, that does not mean that you can't criticize the state of Israel. I mean, if you can't criticize the state of Israel, then half of Israelis wouldn't know what to do all day long. I mean, but they sit in cafes and they criticize the state of Israel. And if it's a right-wing government, the left criticizes it. And if it's a left-wing government, the right criticizes it. And now, since it's a mixed coalition, everybody criticizes it. That's all we do all day. So criticizing Israel's policies is not to be an anti-Zionist, and that's legitimate. There's a lot of Israel's policies that I think are terrible and that I wish we would change. So criticism of Israel does not make you an anti-Zionist, and it certainly doesn't make you an anti-Semite. But here's what is Zionism? I think this is a question we ought to ask ourselves. What is Zionism? Because if Zionism was the movement to build a Jewish state, then Zionism should go out of business, because you can just declare victory and say, we're done. We built a Jewish state. Who needs Zionism? Zionism was not the movement to build a Jewish state. Zionism was a national liberation movement. It was the idea of liberating the Jewish people through the revival of its national entity, its national ethos, its national beliefs, and liberating the Jewish people is still an ongoing thing. If you're opposed to the Jewish states existing, then what you are saying is, I am opposed to the existence of the place where the world's largest Jewish community now lives. The place where in a couple of years, more than half of the world's Jews are going to live. More than half of the world's Jews have not lived in the land of Israel since 586 BCE with the Babylonian exile. I mean, at that point, it was much more than half. But after that, it never came close to half. Even when we rebuilt in the Hashmonaim and before the destruction of the Second Temple, there were still already huge diasporas that had never come back. It's been 2,500 years since most of the world's Jews have lived here. And if it's not already the case now, and it might be, I don't even know, depends on how you number the Jews in other places, it's going to be that way very, very, very soon. And to say that the state that has brought Jewish life back roaringly, you go into an Israeli bookstore, a lot of people see books. I see a miracle. I mean that really very seriously, because 150 years ago, you could have taken basically every single person on planet Earth who spoke Hebrew and put them in the Beth Tefillah sanctuary. I'm not exaggerating. It seats, what, 1,600 or something like that? I mean, you could have literally, there weren't that many more people in the world who spoke Hebrew 150 years ago. There really just weren't. And now, obviously, millions and millions and millions of people speak Hebrew as their native tongue, not only Jews, right? Many Arabs in Israel, many African workers who've come to Israel and raised children here, and so on and so forth. So when I go into an Israeli bookstore, which I, of course, do all the time because it's a professional hazard, the first thing I see is a miracle. When I have to go out of Jerusalem later today being not so soon because it's 3:09 in the morning, but when I come back to Jerusalem at, I don't know, 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I guarantee you there's going to be a lot of traffic getting into Jerusalem onto that winding road coming into the city. Most people are going to be leaning on their horns, getting very annoyed. And I will not, because I'll be with my wife. So first of all, it'll be nice. We'll be talking. And the other thing is, I look at these roads filled with too many cars getting into Jerusalem, and I say to myself, that's a great Jewish problem. Too many Jews on their way into Jerusalem. In other words, I think what we have here is a rebirth of the Jewish people, unlike anything we could have anywhere else. And if you're saying that this rebirth of the Jewish people, culturally, politically, yes, militarily as well, because we can defend ourselves, religiously, intellectually, scientifically, educationally, culinarily, I mean, in every possible way, if you're saying that this rebirth of the Jewish people should not exist, that the most important thing that's happened to the Jewish people in the last 2,000 years should not exist, yes, then what you're saying is that the vitality of the Jewish people should be ripped out of its soul. And therefore, you think the Jewish people should be fundamentally weakened, if not destroyed. And that's anti-Semitism. So if you want to say, I disagree with Israel about settlements or annexation, join the crowd, because millions of Israelis disagree with Israel about settlements or annexation. Words which some of our listeners like and some of our listeners don't like, just using words that appear in the international press regularly. That's fine. You can disagree with a policy here and there, but the minute people out there say Israel has no right to be, and by the way, of course, there's only one country on the planet that has to have a conversation about whether or not it ought to exist. Nobody's having a conversation about Iran, whether or not it ought to exist, even as it's building a weapon that it admits it's going to try to use to destroy Israel. Nobody's talking about should Iran exist. Sudan, which has never been a source of anything terrific when it comes to democracy, just had a coup. Is there any newspaper today talking about whether or not Sudan should exist? North Korea is one of the most oppressive regimes on the planet. We can talk about how to handle North Korea, how to manage North Korea, how to contain North Korea. Is anybody talking about should North Korea exist? There's but one country in the world about which the international community is engaged in a conversation, should it exist? The mere question, therefore, is anti-Semitic. Because when you hold the Jews to a standard entirely unlike the standard that you hold anyone else, then you've delved into anti-Semitism. And that's why anti-Zionism, not criticism of Israel, but anti-Zionism is absolutely just the latest manifestation of anti-Semitism.
Can I just remind you, you were going to answer this question with one word, but you chose to go on. I am so glad you did, because what you said hits it right on the head, which leads me with the question, how come so many American Jewish kids don't get it?
Well, that's a sad one. I mean, that's a source of great pain. So part of it is what I said before about what's going on in the American general culture. And, they want to be part of fighting climate change. It's their generation that is going to take the brunt of what's happening to the planet. Again, you can debate from now until, till the end of time, whether it's human beings doing it or not, whatever, that we're not going into that. But they do see that something is happening to the planet, and they want to be involved in trying to deal with that. They care very much about race in America, and they want to be involved in that. They care very much about the rights of the LGBTQ community, and they want to be involved in that. They care about immigration, which they ought to, by the way, because many of us are Americans because America let our ancestors in. So they care about all of those issues, and they want to be involved in all of those issues. But that group, because of its intersectionality, also throws the Palestinians and anti-Israel into the salad. And they say you can't pick the cucumbers and the tomatoes out of the salad. You either buy the salad or you don't. So young American Jews are opting out because they don't want to be left behind. That's part of it, but that's not all of it. Look, a huge part of it is this, and I'm sure that Beth Tefillah is an exception to this. But when I go around the States, I don't go around the States anymore because I don't travel very much anymore, but hopefully that will come back one day. But when I used to go around the States, especially after the book that came out before the book, Rabbi Wolberg, that you were kind enough to show, but the book that was the history of Israel. And I used to speak to lots of American, very fine day school, high school principals, wanted to talk about an Israel curriculum. And here was the question that I would always get. They would say, I want to do a curriculum for 12th grade, teaching the kids how to respond to anti-Israel stuff before they go to college. Okay. And I say, well, by the time they get to 12th grade, what have they read about Israel? Nothing, basically. How many full books from cover to cover, I ask them, have they read about Israel from K to 11? Not 12, K to 11. How many full books about Israel have they read? If I were to go into class and I say something like Jabotinsky versus Achad Ha'am, does that mean anything to them? And in the vast majority of cases, they have to say, no, we didn't quite get to that. Do they understand, by the way, that even in Tanakh, when they're studying Bible, that the most omnipresent character in the Bible is not God, and is not Abraham, and is not Moses, but is the land of Israel? I mean, that the land of Israel gets discussed much more than God does in the Bible. It's kind of extraordinary. We haven't done our own kids the service of, and again, I know that Beth Tefillah is an exception to this, but we're talking about the larger phenomenon across America. In most even excellent day schools and high schools, if you compare the level of what they're getting in AP American history and what they're getting in regular old Jewish history, you can't compare the levels. AP American history is a full-fledged college level course where they're learning a tremendous amount, and they're being pushed to think and learn and read and study. And we don't demand the same thing from them. So they just don't know. They don't know enough about Zionism. They don't know that Zionism is not a bumper sticker, but it's an ongoing conversation between revisionists and non-revisionists, between religious and non-religious, between socialists and capitalists, between agrarians and urban people, between all sorts of things. It's much more interesting. It's much more fascinating than the Zionists occupy the Palestinians. As long as all they know is that Zion, again, I'm using words that people use, not words that I would necessarily use, but as long as they hear that Zionists occupy Palestinians, who wants it? It's like the difference between music and muzak, right? Nobody falls in love with classical music because of the music that they hear in an elevator. People fall in love with classical music because parents take them to the symphony, or parents play great music on fabulous speakers in the house while the kids are growing up. And we've given them muzak. I mean, we've given them this watered down, simplified, not rich, not nuanced version of what Israel is. And it's very sappy, handsome soldiers, pretty soldiers, guarding the borders by day and sitting around the campfire by night, There's not a soldier here that has sat around a campfire by night in the last 30, 40 years, I guarantee you. We have to sell them on something much more real, much more sophisticated, much more nuanced, and ask them to bring not only their loyalty, but their intelligence to bear. I think what we've asked them to do is to give us their loyalty, and we haven't really cared very much about their intelligence. But when we raise them to be intelligent and thoughtful in every other arena, we should not scratch our heads when they begin to walk away.
Daniel, to say that I agree with you, you know that, because this week, an article that you wrote for Sapir magazine appeared called "Continuity Requires Content." You were kind enough to share that with me a couple of weeks ago. And I wrote to you and I said, this is the document. This is what all of us have to be reading here in America as Jews. And it's not just about Israel. It's about everything. Jews, who are the most highly educated people, know so little about their Judaism. How do we expect to pass this on from generation to generation when we see it before our eyes? I'm going to say the most politically incorrect thing, but I see it even here with Beth Tefillah. We are trying, myself and Dr. Shore and everybody else, to go against the tide and to really put it into our kids' heads and hearts and kishkas. And thank God some come to the day school where they get an intensive Jewish education. But even they, when it comes at the end of the 8th grade, so many are more apt to go to a Mikdana or to a park than to continue in our high school, which thank God is flourishing, when the kids could be given so much, it would make them different Jews, different human beings for the rest of their lives. And yet our own people just don't get it. And I tell you, I worry about the future of the American Jewish community, because in Israel, Judaism, it's part of your life. You can be the most secular Jew, but when Shavuos comes, you're eating cheesecake. Here in the United States, if you're a secular Jew, you didn't even know Shavuos came.
Right. I mean, the great irony, of course, is that, African asylum seekers in Israel know Shavuos because the places that they work are closed, and they know Sukkot because everybody's eating in Sukkot. And they know, the irony is that they are obviously not Jews, and they come from a different continent, and they're entirely culturally different. They know a tremendous amount about Judaism because it's in the oxygen here. I'll actually push the politically incorrect. You have to actually walk out of your office and be with real people who you have to then defend yourself against. All I have to do is click disconnect, and I'm fine. So I can say anything that I want to say and be fairly safe.
No, I can also, Daniel.
Okay, good. I'm glad for you.
Because
and you can always hide out in my house.
They know they don't have to put up with me much longer. Go ahead.
I actually wonder if we're getting to the point where the smartest thing for American Jewish parents to do is going to be to send their kids to college in Israel. First of all, it'll cost a fraction. But why would one want to spend $250,000 or more on 4 years where your kid has to basically hide what they believe, where your kid has to walk around basically not being able to express their values? I mean, I work at a college, but it doesn't matter whether it's mine or something else. I mean, one could go to Hebrew U, one could go to Tel Aviv University, one could go to one of the small liberal arts colleges in Israel, of which Shalem is, of course, the finest. But, and then the kids would come home knowing Hebrew, very possibly knowing Arabic, knowing the Jewish state backwards and forwards, and having spent those 4 formative years surrounded by a flourishing Jewish world, which they could take back with them for a lifetime of flourishing in America. They don't have to make Aliyah, but nobody for a second will feel that they've had to hide who they are, what they believe in, and so on and so forth. Now, I think we're not there yet. I think we're not at the point where most American Jewish parents understand that American college campuses are becoming a slaughterhouse for Jewish identity, but they are. A lot of kids go in, even from places as excellent as Beth Tefillah, and
Right.
come out 4 years later, and it's very problematic. I'll give you an example from a conversation that I had this week with somebody who's a wonderful family in the Orthodox community, a very well-known family foundation. And it's one of these family foundations where the generations really are all still doing it. It's, I think, the fifth or sixth generation of the family business. And now they're working on the grandchildren who are in their late teens, maybe 20s, maybe some of the oldest grandchildren in their early 30s. And the grandfather said to me something fascinating. He said they all grew up basically in modern Orthodox homes all across America and cities all across the country. A few grew up in Israel, but not most. He said, to a person, the ones who went to college in Israel or went to like a YU or something like that are all whole hog in with the Jewish thing. The ones who went to American regular colleges and universities, even though they grew up in the same exact families of these other people, are very, very problematic now when it comes to the commitments that the family has to American Jewish life, to Torah study, to Israel, and so on. He said, to a person, there's 30 grandchildren in this group or something, he said, to a person, the ones who went to Israeli colleges or a Stern or YU, that kind of thing, they're all on board. And to a person, the ones who did not, the ones who went to, Michigan or wherever else where things are complicated, Columbia, very complicated, those are the ones that are more problematic. Now, that's just one family. It's not obviously a very sufficient sample size, but it does suggest to me that American Jews are going to have to face the reality that at a certain point, the American collegiate campus is actually a grave danger. Now, either we can turn that around, and by the way, we could, because if the faucet of American Jewish donations to these universities dried up, university presidents would take a huge look at this. But American Jews are complaining and donating at the same exact time. It's kind of strange. But there are, bazillion-dollar donors to some of these major universities who around their Shabbos tables say, oh, I'm really very upset about what's happening, whatever. But then they write a $20 million check. It doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense to me. If you turned off that faucet, things would change. But that faucet's not going to get turned off. And so we may get to the point that what you're talking about just gets extrapolated even more. And what now sounds politically incorrect may become politically very obvious down the road. But I think college campuses are becoming a real problematic institution for young American Jews. And the alternative is not to go to college. The alternative is to go to one of the many excellent colleges and universities in the Jewish state, spend 4 years here, then go to law school, go to medical school, go to wherever you want to go. Come home speaking Hebrew fluently, knowing Jewish history in a way that you would never have known otherwise, know Israel in its subtlety and its nuance in a way that you're never going to pick up from the international media or even the Jewish media. You might come home learning Arabic as well. You'll have a lifetime of a different relationship with this country, something American Jewish parents might want to think about down the road. But again, I think we're not quite there yet.
Looking into the future, and let's wrap it up with this, the ultimate question. Is there a future for American Jewry? Is there a future for European Jewry? Or is the future of Jewry in the state of Israel?
Okay, so let me say, I'll answer the European one first, and then I'm going to dodge the American one a little bit, and then I'll say something about Israel. Europe is over. I mean, I think Jeffrey Goldberg wrote a piece in the Atlantic probably already 5 or 6 years ago, and I think it was called something like, is it time to leave, or is it time to get out? And he kind of assessed, he'd gone through Europe and France and Germany and so forth, and he took a look. Look, the numbers are declining. The anti-Semitism is on the rise. In my neighborhood here in Baca, where I'm sitting right now, go on the street now, you don't hear anything because it's 3:30 in the morning. But normally, if you go out on a Shabbat afternoon, you hear tons of French, which is wonderful because the bakeries in this neighborhood have gotten much, much better in recent years. So French Jews are leaving. All the Russian Jews who cared deeply about being part of the Jewish community have left and have come either here or to Germany or the United States. But I think it's fair to say that Europe will hang on, but it's not there. Look, America, I don't like being in the situation of being an Israeli Jew who doesn't live in America saying what I think is going to be in America. First of all, lo navi ani velo ben navi, I'm not a prophet. I don't know. Things can change. You know infinitely more about it. So for me to answer to you is really the blind leading the sighted. I don't know. But here's what I will say, and I'll come close to answering your question. When my wife and I made Aliyah in 1998, and this is, I think, an appropriate way of wrapping up, I say we made Aliyah because we wanted to live in Israel. That's not entirely true. We made Aliyah because she wanted to live in Israel, and I wanted to live with her. So, we'd come to Israel for a sabbatical, and a couple of weeks in, she says to me, I'm not going back, right? And I was reading. I remember the school day here was like from 8 a.m. till 11:30. I'm exaggerating a tiny bit, but not much. And when the kids are at school, you make use of every minute. And I said, okay, yeah, whatever, I'm reading. She goes, no, I'm really not going back. And I said, okay, fine, it's all good. And I kept reading. And then she says, and if you go back, I think you're going to miss the kids. And then I understood this woman was really very serious. And I put down my book and I say, oh, you want to talk about this? And we talked about it. And she wanted to give it a run. And I said, look, we'll try it. We've done a lot of things for my career. We moved to LA for my career. It's your turn. And if you want to try it, we'll make a go of it. And as long as we can make it happen, and Baruch Hashem, we've been very, very blessed. And we've had wonderful lives here and raised 3 wonderful kids, and they're all married and grandchildren. We've been really, the Ribono Shel Olam has been very, very good to us. I say that with tremendous gratitude and hakarat hatov to all that we've been given. But when we made Aliyah in 1998, it was all about wanting to be here. There was not a single grain of not wanting to be there. Loved America, grew up in a wonderful community, Beth Tefillah, Baltimore, Pikesville, went to Columbia, went to JTS. What more can you ask for? We lived in a wonderful traditional community in LA in a tree-lined street where, it was perfect. It was really almost perfect. So we came here to be here, not to be there. But I have to say now, 22 years later, 23 years later, when I look back at America, I do say a little bit of Baruch Sheptarani. I'm glad not to be part of that right now. I'm really very glad not to be in a place where the university campuses have become slaughterhouses for Jewish identity. I'm very glad not to be in a place where this little thing has become a political statement. This is just a little thing that you wear to go into a store. It's a mask. There's a little bit of insanity that has taken over American life politically. I actually, whatever I think about this coalition doesn't matter, my own political views. I just love the fact that Naftali Bennett, Israel's first kippah-wearing prime minister, is in the same coalition with Labor and with an Arab party. I don't agree with everything that they do or say. There's things that I wish they would do that they don't. There's things that they do that I wish they wouldn't do. That's politics. But I just love the fact that we've been able to cross the aisle, so to speak, and build something here. I work in a college where there are kids that live across the Green Line, live in settlements who come to us, and we have kids who don't cross the Green Line. But by the way, if God forbid somebody who lives across the Green Line is sitting Shiva, then everybody crosses the Green Line. In other words, people have political views and people have their ideologies, but it's not become crazed. It's not become extreme. Friendships are not breaking up over it. Families are not breaking up over it. Shuls are not breaking up over it. Not Beth Tefillah, but I can't tell you how many rabbis I've talked to who've said to me, literally, my shul's going to fracture because the Republicans and the Democrats won't talk to each other. They can answer each other's Kedusha and Kaddish, but they can't talk to each other, and the shul's going to fracture. We just don't have that here. We just don't have it. And in that regard, Israel, for all of its problematics, is, I think, actually a very, very, very healthy society. And I think I'm very bullish about Jewish life here, about social life here, about Jewish cultural life here. So without saying anything about what I think is going to be in America, because I don't know, I do think that just in terms of demography, the numbers of Jews here is in absolute terms growing up. The numbers of Jews in America, at what rate is not clear, but it is definitely on the decline, either very slowly or somewhat more steeply, depends on who you ask. But the future of the Jewish people is here. And in that regard, we come back to, we're reading the parts of Sefer Breshit right now where these promises are made and where this original family, that is the family of which we're the family now, set their roots down here. And we've really come home. That's what this place is at the end of the day. We come home. And I have secular friends who, when their kids are young, take a Tanakh and get in the car and drive them to the place where that week's Parshat HaShavua took place. And they read the little bit of the Parsha with the kids. Then they have a picnic. And there's nothing like that to remind your kids you don't just live between Syria in the north and Egypt in the south. You live in the Jewish people's home. And I feel a tremendous blessing to be able to live here, to be able to call this place home. And all I'll say is that I feel a tremendous amount of respect and admiration for you, Rabbi Wolberg, living in the United States in an extraordinary community, for having brought that sense of love for the Jewish state, for having taught so much about the Jewish state without in any way disparaging the great things that are still happening in American Jewish life, which you know better than I. You've really, I think, modeled what it is to teach deeply committed American Jews to love and admire, respect and appreciate what's going on in Medinat Israel. If only there were more like you, if only we could clone you, we would be much less worried about the future of American Jewish life. We don't know how to do that yet. So all we can do in the meantime is wish you many, many, many more years of continued success, health, and contribution to the Jewish world. And once again, to thank you personally for inviting me to share this evening with you.
And first of all, I'm really touched by your comments. But secondly, or firstly, this wasn't good. This was great. It was just thrilling to listen to you. It makes Judaism and the Jewish people and the Jewish state really come alive. And we just keep, our challenge is to produce more and more like you. Beth Tefillah takes great pride in having helped produce you. For those out there who want to continue hearing from Daniel and what he's up to, how do we link to your blogs, to your podcasts?
There's a Substack, so you can kind of go, you can Google Daniel Gordis Substack and it'll pop up.
Okay, everybody, you got your challenge for the rest of the evening. For tonight, Helene, thank you so much for making this possible, for keeping Stanley's memory alive in such a positive way. Thanks to all of you for participating. I want to especially thank Chana and Shira and all the people here at Beth Tefillah who work so hard to put things like this together. And having a night with Daniel Gordis makes it all worthwhile. You all take care and be well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.